the microphone and loudly. Tell us your name and spell your first and last name to ensure we get an accurate record. We will begin each hearing today with the appointee's opening statement to introduce themselves to the committee and any other information they'd like to share, followed by any questions the committee members may have of the appointee. And finally, we will hear from anyone present wishing to speak as a proponent, opponent, or neutral testimony on that appointment. We will be using a 3-minute light system for all testifiers and as a proponent, opponent, or neutral. When you begin your testimony, the light on the table will be green. When the yellow light comes on, you have 1 minute remaining, and the red light indicates you need to wrap up your final thought and stop. Questions from the committee may follow. If you're the one that's coming in for the appointment, you're not limited to the 3 minutes. So you're limited to your opening that you may have to share with us. Also, committee members may come and go during the hearing. This is just part of the process, as senators may have bills to introduce in other committees. Just a reminder to please silence or turn off your cell phones, and that verbal outbursts or applause are not permitted in the hearing room. Such behavior may be cause for you to be asked to leave the hearing. The committee members with us today will introduce themselves, starting on my left.
Julie Slama, District 1, representing Otoe, Pawnee, Richardson, Nemaha, Johnson counties.
Jana Hughes, District 24, Seward, York, Polk, and a little bit of Butler County.
On my far right.
I'm Senator Mike Jacobson, District 42. I represent Lincoln County and the 4 counties north, Logan, McPherson, Hooker, Thomas, and then also 3/4 of Perkins County.
John Kavanaugh, District 9, Midtown, Omaha.
Mike Moser, I represent Platte County and parts of Stanton County.
Sarah Mosier is the vice chair of the committee as well. To my left is committee legal counsel Cindy Lamb, and to my far right is committee clerk Lori Vollertson. Our pages for the committee today are Trent Kadavi and Landon Sundi. And with that, we'll open the hearing for our first to Director Thomas E. Riley for Director of Department of Natural Resources. Director Riley. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And thank you, Chairman Bostelman and Senators, for having me here today. My name's Tom Riley, Tomriley. And I'm excited to be here and provide to you a little background about myself and share with you that today at the confirmation hearing. So I'm a lifelong Nebraskan. I'm from Crete, Nebraska, born and raised there. After high school, I went to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I received my bachelor and master's degrees in civil engineering there, an emphasis in water resource management. I am a registered professional civil engineer in the state of Nebraska, and I'm in good standing with the engineering board. I live near Eagle, Nebraska with my wife, and we were fortunate enough to have 3 boys. Our oldest, Logan, he works for the Union Pacific Railroad, just received his MBA from UNO. My second one, Clay, is a senior at UNO. He's studying architectural engineering. And our youngest, Devin, is studying at UNO in computer science. And what I really hope for them is to have the same opportunity that I hope for all of our young kids and professionals to grow a family, live here, and have a great career in Nebraska. So following my master's degree, I was able to get employment here in Nebraska. My early career, I dealt mainly with the restoration of soil and water and remediation of that. Then about 2 decades ago, I worked with some of my closest friends and colleagues, 3 of those, to launch the Flatwater Group here in Lincoln, a water resources and engineering consulting firm. The last few years, I've had the privilege of serving as director at Department of Natural Resources. And the department has a devoted and outstanding team of professionals that they've been just a pleasure to work with for me. My time in natural resources has really reinforced my belief that Nebraska and her water is just a linchpin for today and the future. Last year, the legislature, many of you were part of that, asked the department to take on several important water initiatives in our state. The department's been diligently working on a number of them, the Surface Water Infrastructure Fund, the Jedi and Star Wars and flood control components, and the Perkins County Canal, along with all of our other duties, which include water planning, floodplain management, dam safety, surface water administration, and groundwater well registration and mapping. It's really an exciting time to be a water resources professional in Nebraska for anyone in the business. And I look forward to leading the department to implement the important water vision that the governor and the legislature has laid out for us. As director, I'll continue to guide the department in its mission of safeguarding Nebraska's most precious water resource through sound partnerships, cooperation, science-based decision-making, and all these things will help grow Nebraska. The department's, in my vision, is dedicated to the safe and proper management of the state's water for the future benefit of all Nebraskans. We'll continue to serve up quality water data and mapping information so that the best decisions can be made. We all know that collecting and properly using data and information leads us to those quality decisions. I'm hopeful that more and more Nebraskans will become interested and passionate about Nebraska's water as the department reaches out to engage the public really at all levels. Nebraska is blessed with having an incredible amount of water resources, and I'm looking forward to continuing our work with all Nebraskans to manage our water for today and for tomorrow. Thanks for having me here today, and I'd be happy to take any comments that the committee may have.
Thank you, Director Riley. Are there questions for the committee members? Sir Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chairman Bossman. Thank you, Director Riley, for being here and, of course, for your willingness to continue on serving. So you pointed out, you mentioned about the big projects. And you've been there for 3 years, you said?
Just a little over 2.
Okay. I couldn't remember if we confirmed you in my first year or not. These new projects, have they, I guess, grown the staffing and the purview of the departments that you've been there?
So we've been able to take those on with our staff as it sits. We have brought on an additional senior level staff member within our organizational structure. So we're really trying to accommodate these projects with our existing staff.
Do you foresee that if we do build the canal and reservoir out in, I can never remember, it's not Perkins County, but we call it Perkins County Canal. Keith County, thank you. Somebody who knows. Would that project require, would that be outside contractors or would that be internal hire?
So as we look forward to kind of the management component of that project, we'd probably engage with some folks to help us with that and not internalize all those management, day-to-day management components.
Well, we don't need to talk about it. I appreciate the times we've worked together. You said you'd entertain comments, so I'm going to comment. I appreciate it. You're always willing to answer all my questions, no matter how tough questions I've asked you over the past 2 years. And I really appreciate that, and I appreciate working with you. So I'm very happy you've been reappointed. So I'm going to ask you one question outside the box that we didn't talk about before. Groundwater. I'm hearing more and more about issues with the groundwater in the state of Nebraska in terms of nitrates and things like that. Are we thinking about any novel approaches? Are there any things we should be looking at and anything the department's doing?
Well, I'm the water quantity guy, and the department's role is to manage surface water and interface with the NRDs and our groundwater partners as well. But I will say that our surface water needs are really important to our groundwater recharge when we talk about things like the Perkins County Canal. And we need that water to keep coming into the state because it does provide recharge for those systems, and it does have a direct impact on groundwater. So to that extent, we're always looking at those relationships and how surface water and groundwater do interface and the importance for the whole picture in managing those resources.
Thank you.
Other questions, committee? Sir Jacobson.
I just have one, more of a comment. I appreciate Senator Kavanaugh's questions. And I think, as you well know, I appreciate going on the tour last year to look at the potential project for the Perkins County Canal. Obviously, listening to the governor this morning, sounds like he's looking at funding to get it built. I think we're probably closer to when this gets built. And obviously that's going to be a big load on your department to continue to oversee that. I think you've got great background and have good connections with Colorado. You letting them know the lay of the land. I think you're in a great position to move forward. So first of all, thank you for accepting the appointment and staying in the saddle. You're going to have a lot of workload as we move forward here. And that, I think that was my concern too, as to how you're going to balance the workload. And it sounds like you've got a plan there. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate the work you've done so far, and I'm looking forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kind of following what Sir Kavanaugh said, how many employees work in DNR?
So DNR, we have the ability to have up to 117 within our org chart. We're a little over 100 right now.
And do you have the different divisions within, and what would those be?
We do, and I mentioned those before, some of our kind of ongoing pieces. We have a water planning division, dam safety, so departments in charge of overseeing a number of dams, including our high hazard dams that we have to inspect every year. So that's manned by a number of professional engineers. We have our floodplain management group. Senator, you know them well from our state floodplain hazard mitigation plan that we completed just this past year. We also have our surface water management team that manages our day-to-day operations for our prior appropriation, our senior and juniors. And we also take on some groundwater components where we are the agency that registers and tracks all of our groundwater well registrations, and also provides, and we turn out a lot of mapping for that as well.
Yeah, and I thank you for that. I think I appreciate that, because sometimes everybody doesn't understand what DNR, what your function is, what you do, where your work's at. We confuse it with maybe other opportunities of groundwater, whatever it might be, other projects like that. So I think it's helpful to know exactly where it is, what your department, what you're working on. I see you're working on your PhD in biological systems engineering. And how does that play into your role that you have now?
Well, I'm kind of halfway there and continue to try and trump along that. And honestly, all my kids are going to have a master's degree pretty soon, so I got to have something on them. Plus, it's a real interest of mine to continue to keep on top of where today's research and science is in water, and so that helps me do that as well.
So other than maybe, I think it's LB 723 that we have coming up, is there anything that you would like to share with the committee, tell us of something that changes or something different that you see the department may need legislative work on, or directions, or we can help with?
So, water law is complicated in this state and other states. So sometimes it's not good to add additional words and legislation. I think we have most of the tools we need right now, but we always need to keep our eye on changes happening. And certainly when we look to our friends and states to the west, which are in such dire need of water, we need to make sure that we are protecting our own water resources and using them for the state as wisely as we can for the state's growth and our folks here. But I think in general, we're in pretty good shape.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you, Director Riley, for your willingness to continue to serve and for the work that you've done so far. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for having me.
I would ask if anyone would like to testify as a proponent for the appointment or reappointment of Director Riley to Department of Natural Resources. Any proponents? For the record, welcome Senator Brandt to the committee. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. My name is Andrew Dunkley, ANDREW DUNKLEY. I am with the Nebraska Farm Bureau. And you will notice on the sheet being handed out, I am not our President Mark Card. Unfortunately, he is ill and had to go home. But we wanted to come and testify. I'm testifying today on behalf of the Ag Leaders Working Group, as well as Nebraska Farm Bureau. You all will remember the Ag Leaders Working Group, which includes Nebraska Cattlemen, Nebraska Corn Growers, Nebraska Soybean Association, Nebraska Pork Producers, Nebraska Wheat Growers, Renewable Fuels, and I'm sure I'm forgetting one, but wanted to come up here and testify on behalf of Director Riley. We've had some really great communications with the director, and he's been nothing but professional and responsive to all of our needs. As you can imagine, water is an extraordinary asset to agriculture in Nebraska, and Director Riley has been an asset on its behalf, and we really appreciate his efforts and look forward to continuing to work with him. So I'm open for any questions.
Thank you, Andrew. Are there any questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Are there any other proponents for the reappointment of Director Riley to the Natural Resources? Any other proponents? Seeing none, anyone like to testify in opposition? Anyone in opposition? Seeing none, anyone like to testify in the neutral capacity? Seeing none, that'll close our hearing of the gubernatorial appointment for Director Tom Riley. Thank you. Our next appointment, let me get it up here. I think here it is. Got it. So now we'll be moving on to the Natural Resources Commission, Dennis Strauch. Good afternoon, and welcome.
Good afternoon, Chairman Busselman and members of the Natural Resource Committee. I have served 2 terms on the Natural Resource Commission, representing irrigation districts throughout the state.
State and spell your name,
Oh,
please.
I'm sorry. I go by my middle name, Dennis. My first name is Walter, but I go by Dennis, Dennis. My last name, Strauch, is spelled Strauch.
Go ahead.
As I mentioned, I have completed 2 terms on the commission representing irrigation districts across the state. I have been renamed for a 3rd term, which will be my last because it's time. A little information about myself. I'm a native of Western Nebraska, having spent my entire life in the Scottsbluff area. After high school, I attended junior college, studying pre-engineering classes, left college, got married, had some kids. Went back to college in the late 1980s and studied business management. I started my career in water resource management with Pathfinder Irrigation in 1977. Pathfinder is the largest irrigation district in the state of Nebraska. We serve over 800 customers and 117,000 acres in Scottsbluff, Laurel, and Sioux counties in Nebraska, as well as Goshen County in Wyoming. Not many people know we go across state lines and are involved in Wyoming water resources. In 1981, I was named to a newly created position as an assistant manager and was charged with developing and implementing the district's water conservation plan. In 1990, I was named general manager for the district. I retired from full-time employment with the district at the end of 2021. I am currently retained on a part-time basis as an advisor to help with the transition to new management. As general manager, I was responsible for all aspects of the district's operation, including budget, development and implementation of policy, delivery of water, maintenance of the water delivery system. I oversaw 25 full-time employees and 17 seasonal employees. I also had a lot of working relationships with federal and state agencies in both states because of our water rights and water operations in Wyoming. I worked with those folks in Wyoming as well. My involvement in state policy includes serving on the Water Policy Task Force appointed by Governor Johans in 2002, as well as the Water Funding Task Force appointed by Governor Heineman in 2013. I also serve on several local and statewide boards. Having completed 2 terms on the commission, I have a very good understanding of the role I play as a commission member, which will help mentor new members as they come onto the commission. My first term on the commission was spent with developing the application process and rules and regulations for the new Water Sustainability Fund, as well as reviewing all the rules and regulations that are assigned to the different funds we administer. The commission continues to listen to project sponsors and others as to how the commission can improve the process. In fact, we're in the process of another set of rules that are being reviewed that may be put forward soon. My number one goal for serving on a commission is to help ensure Nebraska moves forward with the wise management of its natural resources, none more important than water. While Nebraska is blessed with an abundance of water, it is important to remember it's a finite resource that needs to be managed, developed, and protected to ensure future generations have adequate quantity and quality of water to grow Nebraska. I believe as the commission moves forward, we'll see a change in some of the applications we're receiving. As there's been a question here to Director Riley about water quality issues, and prior to the last a few applications, most of them have been for water quantity, but we're starting to see more applications coming in to address water quality issues, and I think that'll be an important role the commission plays into the future. Second goal is to invest the time necessary to ensure the financial resources given to the commission by this legislature and invest wisely. Over the past 8 years, I think the commission has demonstrated fiscal restraint and only funded the very best water projects that move Nebraska forward in developing and prudently managing its water resources. I also believe my experience will help as we bring new members onto the commission. I like to call it institutional memory. But if confirmed by the committee, I promise to continue to commit the time necessary to conduct my duties as a commission member. And with that, I will close and take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Strauch. Are there any questions from committee members? Senator Hughes.
So newbie, you mentioned that the commission, it sounds like gives out grants and things like that. Where does the funding come from annually? What do you have? And maybe just some sample of types of projects.
There's several funds administered by the commission. There's a small dam and watershed fund. The big fund is the Water Sustainability Fund, which is about $11 million a year that comes from the legislature through appropriations. Most of the other funds are funded, I think, directly to the department through the legislature's appropriations as well. There's several funds. There's Soil and Water Fund. There's numerous funds. The Water Well Decommissioning Fund is also one of those.
Senator Moser.
So with the drought, were there some irrigation districts that had to curtail water deliveries last year?
Yes, the drought. From my area, we get on average 14.5 inches of rainfall. So without irrigation water, we're not in ag production. We just can't produce. In our area, since 2002, we've actually had 10 years, almost half of those years since 2002 have been water short years. Our water supply is dependent on the snow that falls in Colorado and Wyoming mountains, comes into the federal reservoirs, and then it's delivered to our valley for irrigation. Our irrigation system is unique in that way. As Director Riley said, we do a significant amount of groundwater recharge. Without our systems, available groundwater is very limited. Our groundwater feeds our industrial, our municipal, our domestic. All our groundwater uses, including additional irrigation, is sourced through our surface water. But there are shortages throughout the state. Ours has probably been one of the most impacted areas just because it's been several years almost back to back.
So were you able to deliver half the water that they were requested, or?
It depends on runoff, of course, that comes out of the mountains and what we're able to save from year to year. But last year we delivered about 80% of a normal supply. We have delivered as small as half in some years. So we've improved our system significantly over the last 25 years to where we've actually been able to manage pretty well, even with our limited water supplies and trying to produce a crop.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Senator Brandt.
Thank you, Chairman Bossman, and thank you for your testimony today. When the tunnels collapsed 3 years ago. Did that affect Pathfinder?
Only in the fact that we sent staff and equipment over to help the two districts that were impacted on the Fort Laramie Canal. But yeah, that was a significant impact to the valley when that.
Has that situation been resolved in Wyoming or not?
I think they have. I'm not involved much with their districts other than what I hear from their managers at the time to time and directors, but I think they have agreed to a final solution, which my understanding is they will be boring new tunnels through the existing tunnels and relining. That's the approach I think they've agreed to from an engineering standpoint. And I think they're in the process. There's quite a bit of permitting and other things they have to secure as well as funding to get it done.
But they have a temporary solution in place today to get those acres wet on the Nebraska side?
They have a temporary fix. It has an impact on their capacity. It's about 90% of their normal capacity. So they have had significant limits on their water deliveries to their producers. Some of my good friends farm under that district, and the impacts have been pretty significant on crop production, reductions of 20-25% in yield because of it. It's something that needs to get fixed soon.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Chair Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chairman Bosman. Thank you, is it Strauch?
Sure.
Thank you for your willingness to continue to serve. So I obviously want to ask you a question about the water quality projects. What kind of projects were you thinking are going to be coming for grant funding?
Well, we have seen a few water quality projects. City of Hastings was a big one that was awarded early, the first or second application to the Water Sustainability Fund. And it was a big water quality improvement project for them. About $6 million roughly was given to them.
Was that like a reverse osmosis?
It had to do with some re-injecting water to improve the water quality. I don't think their issues were really high nitrates so much as they had some armory contamination in that area. I believe.
Uranium, I think.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
That's our problem in Western Nebraska too, is uranium.
And we saw last year, I think we did give some ARPA funds for some towns to get water quality improvement projects as well. So that's the first one, but are you seeing more? Are you just expecting more or?
We've seen some smaller ones come in, mostly cities. One of them was a reverse osmosis. Some of it was dealing with aged infrastructure for municipalities and small cities that were struggling not only with water quality, but also quantity issues that were combined just because of, I call aged infrastructure. But we're seeing some more applications every year that are kind of looking more at water quality. I think we'll continue to see more because it's becoming a bigger problem all the time.
And so I guess that's my question to you. So I guess two-part question. One is you guys have regulations for the grants. Do you think you need to update the requirements to make sure that these projects are eligible, or are they already contemplated in?
They are already eligible. There are water quality points that are awarded under the grant system. And in fact, the city of Hastings was one of the highest scored grant applications we've received.
And in terms of those projects all sound like, I mean, my impression of like, I'm thinking of reverse osmosis, they clean the water, they inject it back in. And as Senator Gregor, who used to sit over there where Senator Brandt is, and we miss on this committee, would say the solution to pollution is pollution. And that sounds like that's what these projects are.
Some of them are, yes.
My question is, are we talking about looking at other projects that are going to address maybe the front end and trying to prevent the water from the quality from degrading as opposed to addressing the degradation once it's happened?
I think that's probably going to come more from the NRDs as they have to look at how to ensure water quality in the future. Nitrates is a big problem throughout the state. I know that. I think you're going to see the NRDs have to start dealing with best management practices, things that improve farming practices to limit how much nitrates and contaminants reach the groundwater as well as surface water.
But that's not, there wouldn't be grants or funds available through water quality. Those sorts of things.
Unless there was a specific project that would implement some kind of a project that would help with that, that could possibly move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, committee members? Seeing none, thank you for your willingness to continue, sir,
All right,
on the Natural Resource Commission. Appreciate you coming in today. Thank you. Anyone like to testify as a proponent for the reappointment of Dennis Strauch to the Natural Resource Commission? Anyone to testify as a proponent? Seeing none, anyone like to testify as an opponent to the reappointment of Dennis Strauch to the Natural Resource Commission? Seeing none, anyone like to testify in neutral capacity? Seeing none, that'll close our hearing on the reappointment of Mr. Dennis Strauch to the Natural Resource Commission. We will now, next hearing will be on Dennis Brundage. If you please come forward. Mr. Brundage will be, let's see, an appointment to the Natural Resource Commission. So, good afternoon.
Good morning, Senator Bosman, senators. My name is Devin Brundage, D-E-V-I-N, Brundage, B-R-U-N-D-A-G-E. I am a newly appointed appointee to the Nebraska Natural Resources Commission. I am a lifelong Nebraskan as well. Grew up on a small farm near Carroll, Nebraska. Graduated from high school there, attended Hastings College, studying physics, and received a Bachelor of Science and Electrical Engineering degree from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. From there, I went to work for the Central Nebraska Public Power and Irrigation District and have been there ever since, now over 30 years. In my role there, I've held different responsibilities, but by and large, the district, the Central District, is the entity that has Lake McConaughey and the power generation facilities from Lake McConaughey down to Minden, including the irrigation facilities. We irrigate over 107,000 acres in the South Central Valley. Water is absolutely important to our district in many respects. Our district's been around for 80 years, born of the need to produce power and to deliver surface water irrigation to our customers. Today, we provide low-cost surface water irrigation, groundwater recharge, power generation, recreational opportunities, and an enhancement to the environment in which we live. That's our mission, and as general manager for the last 5 years, I work with the board to try to achieve that mission and do everything that we can within the confines of our district to promote prosperity up and down the river valley, utilizing that water resource in good stewardship fashion and working with our partners to manage that resource as best we can for everybody. We embarked on a number of exciting adventures in the last few years, including the Star Wars endeavor that the legislature has put forward to improve recreation at Lake McConaughey. Central has been involved in the South Platte Canal, the Perkins County Canal, for many years, promoting the need to continue to bring that resource to Nebraska and to our people. We continue to work with our partners in innovative ways to try to develop methods by which we can manage the water resource most effectively for everyone and ensure that we're serving the Nebraskans the best that we can. With that, I'll close and entertain any questions or comments you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Brundage. Can you, I'll ask first, what position are you filling on the commission?
It is the position for the Public Power and Irrigation District's seat.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions from committee members? I see, I think you're appointed in August, was it, of last year, 22. Have you had the opportunity prior to and since then to obviously be at meetings, and how many of them do you typically have, and how many have you been at your involvement with that?
I'm learning rapidly, but I wasn't able to attend the last meeting in the late fall of last year, so I don't know what I don't know at this point.
Yeah, how many meetings do they have?
I believe they're quarterly.
Quarterly. Okay. Do you think that there may be a circumstance where you might be involved in a conflict of interest and in the position that you've been appointed to? And if so, how would you handle it?
With regard to administering grant funds and the like, should there be a time at which our district might be a participant in a fund request, we would, of course, have to step back from that discussion.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the committee members?
I would have that.
Senator Jacobson?
I guess just as a follow-up, if you're meeting quarterly and you did miss the last meeting, are we assume we're committed to making all the meetings going forward and this will be a priority?
Sorry, I didn't miss it. I made that one. The
Okay.
last meeting that after I was appointed.
Okay,
I made.
excuse me, I misunderstood that. Thank you. All right.
Okay, seeing no other questions, thank you for allowing us to serve and coming in today.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, committee.
I'd ask anyone who'd like to testify as a proponent for David Brundage to be appointed to the Natural Resource Commission. Any proponents? Anyone like to testify in opposition? Seeing none, anyone like to testify in neutral capacity? Seeing none, that will close our hearing of the appointment of Devin Brundage to the Natural Resource Commission. Next will be the appointment or reappointment of Dan Czaplewski? Mark Czaplewski, sorry.
Thank you, Senators.
Yeah, you're welcome.
My name is Mark Czaplewski, MarkCzapLewski. I knew my ABCs in kindergarten. I also am a native Nebraskan, born and raised in Loop City. Went to high school there, went on to college at UNK back in the Kearney State College days. Have a bachelor's degree in biology with a minor in environmental studies. Married a native Nebraskan. My wife Rita is a registered nurse in Grand Island. 3 kids, a daughter in Omaha who's a nurse practitioner, a daughter in South Sioux City who's a science teacher, and a son who lives in Phoenix who's a neuropsychologist. After graduating from college, I began employment in Columbus, Nebraska, or Nebraska Public Power District, where I worked in both the Environmental Affairs Department as well as during my later years there in the Water Resources Department. Worked there a little over 20 years and then moved to Grand Island with my family and worked for 20-some years for the Central Platte Natural Resources District in Grand Island as a biologist. Worked primarily on water resources issues, but also on biological issues. I worked on Platte River issues, which you might know deal with a lot of endangered species and species of special interest. So that was a good share of what I did. I filled out the end of a vacated term here in 2017, I believe. My position on the commission is wildlife conservation interests, and would be my second reappointment. So,
Okay,
that's all I have. If you got questions, I'm happy to try and answer them.
great, thank you. Thank you for willingness to serve. Other questions from committee members? Senator Mosier.
When the Platte River goes dry like it did this spring and summer, how long does it take for that, when that water comes back, to get all the species of fish and different things back into the river?
Depends on the specifics, but that's something we actually looked into more than once, and surprisingly quickly, especially from a fish perspective. You know, migratory birds are not so impacted, but even the fish species that inhabit the river, you know, for the most part, developed in a prairie stream that historically went dry far more frequently than it does now. And so the species that exist there are fairly in tune with that kind of water water supply and boom and bust. And so generally respond very quickly.
I had a comment from a friend about the river going dry, and I told her that it's not that uncommon. I mean, Platte River's gone dry half a dozen times at least in my time
Yeah,
there.
at least, and historically, there's something I looked into years ago, but I think there's pretty good evidence that prior to European development of the Platte, there was the Platte probably went dry as frequently as one every 3 years, and not just for a day or two, but for most of a summer, sometimes for a month or more.
Yeah. It's too bad we can't take like the loop and dump it into the Platte sooner so we keep water in there. That's a joke. Don't.
Senator Jacobson.
Thank you, Senator Bostelman. I guess I've got a strong interest in the Perkins County Canal project, and I'm just curious from your background, biologist standpoint, what should we anticipate for any issues from a biological standpoint, assuming that project moves forward?
I'm not sure of all the permitting required there, so I'm not sure who all is going to be involved, but I'd be surprised if there weren't folks that brought forward endangered species issues. If there are federal permits involved, the Fish and Wildlife Service would probably be involved, and I'm guessing that would be a big focus of their interest there. Possibly the state of Nebraska too, I'm not sure.
From that endangered species, what would be the top of the list, or what should we maybe potentially anticipate if there is something raised there, which I assume would be?
Thinking of primarily the Central Platte and the Lower Platte, where endangered species issues tend to be focused. The Central Platte issues will be primarily migratory birds, whooping crane, least tern, piping plover. On the lower, which are migratory, and so come through in the spring, go south in the fall, and so they're here and gone. In least terns and piping plovers occasionally nest in the Platte too, so there's a summertime potential for impact.
Are both of those species still on the endangered list, or did one of them go off?
Piping plovers, they're both under consideration for downlisting or delisting.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
From a Lower Platte perspective, a long way from Perkins County maybe, but especially the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I'll be surprised if they aren't additionally concerned about pallid sturgeon and endangered fish species that occasionally uses the Lower Platte. By the Lower Platte, I mean downstream of the Elkhorn, sometimes up as far as the Loop, but rarely. It's a pretty marginal habitat, in my opinion, for that species, but nonetheless is used, and so I'm sure it will get it will be discussed.
Thank you.
Question I have a follow-up with Mr. Mosier. When we say Platte's running dry, Platte, there's subsurface movement of water there, correct?
Right.
I mean,
Below the
surface wise,
Yeah.
we still have
Yeah.
water.
The
moving through
groundwater
sounds
beneath that is-
underneath that's flowing down through there.
Yeah.
This last year, I was out at the Creighton Trust and the Conservancy out there, and we were talking. The question came up, and I don't know if the commission has much to do with this, with the migration of the cranes and the hoopers and stuff coming through. They're starting moving further and further away from the river. Is there anything that the commission works along those lines with restoration and or?
I think it's something to be concerned with, but not very directly, as projects might come through for potential funding, particularly with the Water Sustainability Fund that you heard about recently here earlier. Depending on the project, if there are projects that might want to withdraw water from the over and fully appropriated Platte River, that could affect those species and might drive them to other water sources. Indirectly, I think that would be where those sorts of issues would come up. But other than that, not particularly directly involved, very project specific.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you for your willingness to continue to serve on the Natural Resource Commission.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you for coming in today. Would ask anyone for proponents for the reappointment of Mark Czaplewski to the Natural Resource Commission. Any proponents? Seeing none, any opponents to the reappointment of Mark Czaplewski? Anyone in neutral capacity? Seeing none, that will close our hearing for the reappointment of Mr. Mark Czaplewski to the Natural Resource Commission. We'll now open up a hearing on the reappointment of Dan Steinkruger to the Natural Resource Commission. This is an original appointment, not a reappointment, correct? First time.
Well, it's a new appointment. I previously served on the commission representing the Lower Platte Basin. Okay. Good afternoon, Chairman Bostelman, Senators. My name is Dan Steinkruger, DanSteinkruger. My wife Lynn and I live here in Lincoln, Nebraska, and we're both retired. My family originated my family originally came from the Franklin area. Both sides of my family farmed in the Republican basin down there. And I continue to have cousins and their families that are involved in agriculture in that area. My father farmed until 1960, gave up farming and moved our family to Lincoln. So I grew up here. I went to the University of Nebraska and got a degree in ag economics and went to work for USDA out of the university. I worked for, at that time, it was the Agricultural Stabilization and Conservation Service. It's currently the Farm Service Agency. They simplified the name. And over my career, I was the county director in the Cass County ASCS office in Weeping Water. My wife and my family and our kids lived there. In 1990, we moved to Lincoln and I took a job in USDA's State Farm Service Agency, where I worked in conservation programs, emergency programs, and production programs. And the last 8 years of my career, I spent as the state director for the Farm Service Agency here in Nebraska. I served 17 years on the board of the Lower Platte South Natural Resource District. Over that time, I served as chair of the board and some other officer positions. I also served on the board in the Nebraska Association of Resource Districts and chaired that board for a year. As I said, I served 2 years of a term on the Natural Resources Commission prior to this appointment, representing the Lower Platte Basin. I have a strong interest in agriculture and natural resources and the environment, and that's why I submitted my name for this position to the governor. With that, I entertain any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Steinkruger. Are there questions from the committee? Have you had the opportunity to attend? I see December was the appointment. Have you attended a meeting either prior to the appointment or since the appointment?
Yeah, I attended a number of meetings over the last couple of years. I did not make the December meeting. And I also served on the committee that ranked and recommended the Water Sustainability Fund applications.
Are there any changes? I think there was maybe some changes. Are there any changes to that was made this year to that process?
Well, the process is designed really to follow the guide the legislature provided in the original legislation for the fund. And so that's how the ranking system is designed and has been used.
So Sir Kavanaugh isn't here, but I think you probably asked this question. Was there any, are there any programs there that dealt with, say, reverse osmosis or that you've seen come through?
Well, I think the previous individuals that testified mentioned a couple. The natural resource districts have the responsibility for water quality. And, what we're seeing is applications for them to gather data within their districts to use for water quality program administration at the local level. Beyond that, the Hastings was mentioned. And as was said before, there have been some smaller municipalities dealing with specific issues for those communities.
Sure. How many commissioners are there?
I'm sorry?
How many commissioners are there? How many of you sit on the Natural Resource Commission?
22 or 23, I believe. The director would be better to ask that question.
No, that's fine. That's so. So you have different. They break out into maybe other subcommittees, areas of expertise.
Well, certainly the chair appoints the committee to consider the Water Sustainability Fund applications.
Okay. Are there other questions from committee members? Is there anything that you see that needs to be changed that we need to consider?
Well, I certainly have some personal opinions, but to me, the commission really it does the bidding of the legislature in how the legislature passes, your guidelines, your laws on how the programs are to be administered.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Thank you for your willingness to serve.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Could I submit a letter in support?
You cannot submit a letter to support for, okay. Give it to Paige and they'll make copies so that we get them all.
Okay, I have copies.
Okay, that'll work. Oh, that'll work. Thank you very much for coming in today. Thank you for willingness to serve. So I would ask that anyone, a proponent, to testify in support of Dan Steinkruger for the Natural Resource Commission. Any proponents? Any opponents to the appointment of Dan Steinkruger to the Natural Resource Commission? Anyone testify in the neutral capacity? Seeing none, we did receive a letter from John Hanson, Nebraska Farmers Union, in support. With that, we'll close the hearing on the appointment of Dan Steinkruger to the Natural Resource Commission. Thank you for your willingness to serve, gentlemen. Next, we'll open the hearing on Kristen Gottschalk to the Nebraska Power Review Board. Good afternoon. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Senator Bosman, members of the Natural Resources Committee, this is an unusual seat for me to be in. My name is Kristen Gottschalk, Kristen Gottschalk. I'm a lifelong resident of the state of Nebraska, with the exception of 18 months as a tween when I lived in Saipan. Did return back to the great state of Nebraska. I attended the University of Nebraska, receiving a bachelor's degree in agriculture, natural resources, and wildlife management. Through in my past life, I spent a number of years working for the Game and Parks Commission in a variety of temporary and consulting areas, working to write for the magazine, developing outdoor education materials, and providing educational programs, as well as working on barn owl restoration and river otter reintroduction in the state of Nebraska. A lot of fun back in those days. I did work following my employment at Game and Parks. I continued to do some consulting work in environment education. In fact, was a founding board member of the Nebraska Environment Education Association. I also did work as a consultant, writing environmental assessments for projects that received federal funding and that impacted the state of Nebraska. In a roundabout way, I know it sounds like I'm almost testifying to be on the Natural Resource Commission, but in a roundabout way, things changed. I came to work at the legislature for a friend of mine who's a fisheries biologist and moved quickly from that position to a legislative aid position for State Senator Stan Shellpepper, who hired me because of my ag background. But he had a strong interest in electricity and the rural electrification program. In fact, had served on the Stanton County Rural Electric Board for many years and had been president of that association. And so we did deal with a lot of electric issues in our office because of his experience and knowledge. I continued working for Stan until he passed away in office in 1999. Finished out that term with a freshman senator who was appointed, but then went to work for the Nebraska Rural Electric Association. Started my career there as the editor of the magazine, because if you have a degree in wildlife biology, you can do just about anything, right? So I did work as the magazine editor for the Rural Electric Nebraska. And for those of you that live in rural areas, you probably have read that magazine. 2.5 years into that, our general manager retired and our lobbyist became the new general manager. So I assumed the role of government relations director, which of course had a component of lobbying, which was one, probably the major portion of the job. But as government relations director, I also worked coordinating efforts between rural electric members and state and federal and local agencies. One of the things I'm most proud of, this kind of takes me back to my wildlife roots, was able to work with the Fish and Wildlife Service and Game and Parks in developing avian protection plans for the rural electric systems, which is something that it was a collaborative effort and created a partnership between two agencies that used to maybe butt heads a little bit. Part of that included educating the members at Fish and Wildlife Service and Game and Parks as to the configurations of distribution systems, what that means, and how those could be changed to protect wildlife. Also worked with the AG's office, working on human trafficking issues. Rural electric linemen in that are often in those areas where it's most important to be the eyes for things that may go on that shouldn't be happening. I did retire my position in 2021, fully thinking I wanted to maybe pursue other interests, do something else, but retirement kind of called to me a little harder. So I fully retired my position. One of the things I didn't mention is I also served on the board of directors for the Nebraska Water Resource Association for the association for NREA. I'm excited about the opportunity to serve as a member of the Power Review Board. You hate to think that all that institutional knowledge you gather during your years of employment goes to waste when you retire. So I hope that I can bring some of that experience to the Power Review Board. I do feel strongly, though, that my role on the Power Review Board is to follow the statutory guidelines and the specific parameters set in statute. So whether I have an opinion on a certain generation resource or a transmission line, that's secondary. And as long as those issues that come before the board meet the statutory specifications, that's where the votes have to happen. And I feel very strongly about that. Kind of bringing my background to the Power Review Board. I think that good information helps people make good decisions. I employed that as an environment educator. I employed that as a lobbyist. I think I would continue that as a member of the PRB. While I said I did retire, I did engage with a group that sought to advance education on nuclear energy, strictly an education organization, and do serve in a leadership role in the Advanced Nuclear Coalition, which is in the process of putting together an educational forum in May. With that, I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for Ms. Gottschalk. Other questions from committee? Senator Brandt.
Thank you, Chairman Bosselman. Thank you, Ms. Gottschalk, for testifying today. Can you enlighten me, how many people are on the Power Review Board? And essentially, is their function to approve every transmission line in the state?
The Power Review Board was created in 1963, ironically, the year I was born. Was created in 1963, has 5 members. So it's a small board to make decisions. And while they are not required to approve transmission, every single transmission line, anything over 700 volts does have to come in for approval unless, and I would have to consult, again, I'm still in the learning process of all the statutes attributed to the Power Review Board, unless of course it's a short enough line or it's connecting to another line if it's not a large project.
So a large project, our line comes to mind. We're all kind of familiar with that.
Yes.
That would fall under the purview of your board would have to approve that for that project to go forward.
Yes, and I believe that approval has already taken place for
Okay.
the R line. Yes.
Thank you.
But yes, that's where it would go.
Other questions? Senator Jacobson.
I guess I'd just like to follow up on the question that Senator Brandt just asked with regard to the R line that runs right through the middle of my district. And needless to say, it has significant amount of controversy associated with it. You've indicated your involvement with environment and endangered species and different things. I'm being told that bats are in particularly endangered when they encounter wind energy farms. That they evidently suck the lungs out of the bat when it goes through past the wind turbines. And I'm just curious as to your thoughts as it relates to wind energy in particular, and whether it's an efficient way to produce electricity and whether it's a safe way to do it in terms of the environment, in particular, various species.
Well, I just want to preface this by saying my role on the Power Review Board,
I'm asking for your personal opinion.
My personal opinion is that there is a need to have a diverse energy resource mix in the state of Nebraska. And I do think there needs to be evaluation on every generation project for its impact on wildlife, land use, and the impacts that it might have on the environment. I think those things are important, and those are part of the approval process where they have to go through a consultation with the Game and Parks. And in those very large projects, and we're talking about the R line, of course, you have to have a very thorough environmental review of the impacts that it will have. My personal opinion is that wind has a role, but it's not, it would not be my first choice of generation. But me picking generation resources is not my role.
Well, I'm intrigued with your background in nuclear, and it sure seems to me that wind would be clearly the bottom of my choice because of its inefficiency. Seemingly, it's generally done for tax purposes more so than real quality, reliable generation. And small nuclear seems to be heading in that direction. So I'm just curious as your view on the nuclear side.
I do believe that nuclear and advanced nuclear that is coming of age at this point. We're seeing new projects at the Idaho National Labs, and we're seeing microreactors and small nuclear reactors. And one of the things that we're seeing as we're moving to a zero carbon environment, utilities are moving from reducing their carbon inputs, and there is still a need for a strong base load generation resource that, with the other intermittent loads that may be on the line that are part of that diverse mix, is something that can chase those loads and respond to those loads, but ensure that electric reliability stays in place. Again, that is a role of the Power Review Board to make determinations on the reliability, the cost of the infrastructure, and what's in the best interest of the consumers.
Thank you.
Senator Salama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And not a question, just a general statement. We very rarely see appointees come along with the mix of experience and the length of experience that you have, and your willingness to serve on this board is really appreciated. And I'd just like to thank you for putting your name in for consideration.
Seeing no other questions, thank you for your willingness to serve and coming in today.
Thank you.
Is there anyone who'd like to testify as a proponent for the appointment of Kristen Gottschalk to the Nebraska Power Review Board? Any proponents? Seeing none, anyone would like to testify in opposition to Kristen Gottschalk to the Nebraska Power Review Board? Seeing none, anyone like to testify in neutral capacity? Seeing none, there was one letter of opposition submitted by Al Davis, a Nebraska chapter Sierra Club. With that, we will close the hearing on the appointment of Kristen Gottschalk to the Nebraska Power Review Board. Our next hearing will be on Bradley Bird, appointment to the Nebraska Ethanol Board.
Hi, thanks for having me here today. Brad Bird, it's B-R-A-D, B-I-R-D. I've been a 26-year-long member of the Steamfitters and Plumbers, local union 464 out of Omaha, Nebraska. I grew up in Omaha. About 13 years ago, moved out into Washington County. My kids go to Blair schools, and we kind of became part of that community. I spent my first 16 years working for the Waldinger Corporation. I had the opportunity to work at a number of the ethanol plants around the state, primarily Cargill, Husker Ag, and Plainview, and Aurora. The past 10 years, I was in the office representing about 1,300 pipe fitters, welders, HVAC techs, and plumbers across the state. And most recently, I've changed jobs to where now I represent over 15,000 members throughout Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska, and Kansas. I joined the Ethanol Board in 2017, filled out the remainder of a term, and then this would be my second appointment. I've really enjoyed being on the board, primarily to help educate people on the importance of ethanol and expanding access to the higher blends. Some exciting things, most recently, we've been working on the E30 demonstration, just approved to be in 825 non-flex-fuel vehicles. The data we hope to collect through that study is going to be really important to everything we're doing moving forward. While on the board, I've learned a lot about how the other state agencies and with our involvement, like the Department of Economic Development and Department of Agriculture, all work together. It's been great to see how everybody can come together for the same common goals, work together on those things. It's been really eye-opening for me. But most importantly to me is the ability for ethanol production to provide high-skilling jobs to the rural communities. I believe across the state of Nebraska, the ethanol industry directly supports over 14,000 jobs, and the average earnings for a person in the industry are about $78,000 a year. So I thank you for having me here today, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Bird, for willingness to serve. One question I have: what position do you fill on the board?
So originally it was a labor position. I was a labor representative, but anymore I don't know that that's a requirement. So I'm just a board member. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from board members? Senator Brandt.
Thank you, Chairman Bosselman. Thank you for your testimony today. How many active ethanol plants are left in the state of Nebraska?
Oh boy, I'd have to refer to Reed.
No, that's fine.
Not one, but
And then you stated you worked at like Aurora and Husker, some of these plants. The one byproduct, distillers, is very important to the cattle feeding industry in the state of Nebraska. Do the majority of our plants put out wet or dry distillers?
the majority of the plants, I'd say it's a good mix between them. I'm not 100% sure on the percentage.
So then the last question is, the funding for the ethanol board comes from?
Through the state. So as one of our roles on the board, and I'm going to let Reed talk about that because I will absolutely get it wrong. But one of our roles on the board is to approve any spending, approve any financing, approve the spending that comes to us. So well, the administrative side kind of gets more involved in the funding of the board. And as a board member, we get more involved in what we spend as a board.
All right, thank you.
Are you self-funded, the board?
It comes out of a tax. Yeah, I know Reed's going to get up and talk in a minute, so I'm going to let him explain it because I'm going to say something wrong on that. Yeah.
That's fine. That's fine. Are there other questions from committee members? Sir Hughes.
That's okay. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Newbie, how many people are on the board and how often do you meet? And
So we meet quarterly. I believe there's 7 board members plus our technical advisor from UNL, Hunter Floodman.
okay, thank you.
Sir Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chairman Bossman. Thank you, Mr. Bird, for your willingness to serve. And it's always good to see somebody from Omaha in this committee. So the ethanol board basically it's promoting ethanol. Is really what you guys
We do.
In the last 2 years, have you guys seen any kind of, I don't know, black eye on the industry as a result of what happened in Meade?
You know, it's been a topic of discussion, but not directly. I mean, at first it seemed like it was going to start out that way. There's been a lot of discussions about it. But honestly, with the carbon capture and a lot of the things are going, we've just focused our energy on other areas. So like the E30 demonstration, that's a real good one that we've been focusing on. So not directly to answer your question.
And kind of off with Senator Brandt's question about the distillers that comes out that a lot of cattle producers use. The stuff out of Meade was not something you can feed, wasn't food grade, wasn't able to be used for
Correct.
Cattle. Have you seen any kind of people concern in terms of that symbiotic relationship between ethanol plants and cattle production?
You know, honestly, with everything going on in Meade, it was just a lot of noise for a while. And as a board, like I said before, we discussed it, we looked at it, but we just didn't focus on it. We just kept moving forward with our mission.
Thank you.
I believe that the Alton was not a member of your ethanol board. Is that right?
I'm sorry?
They were not a member of your ethanol board, so they do not have a direct relationship with your board anyway, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Senator Jacobson.
Thank you, Senator Osman. I appreciate your willingness to serve. I think you bring a unique background and can do a good job on this board. In addition to my day job, I'm an ag producer, farm ground down in Clay County, and actually deliver corn to the ethanol plant in Aurora. Obviously, the alt-N thing is really a one-off by a long ways, and the ethanol industry has been very responsible and a great industry for Nebraska. Some of the statistics you mentioned early on it's huge. It's huge to really creating a clean alternative fuel. It's providing a high quality feed stuff for the cattle feeding industry, and it's absorbing a lot of our corn crop and providing great unique opportunities for our farmers to sell to. As you look at continuing to promote ethanol on this board, that's really your main push. Where do you see the focus going forward to continue to expand the use of ethanol throughout Nebraska?
So in multiple ways, one with the carbon capture technologies coming out, it's going to take some upgrades. It's going to take some modifications to the plants, but there's just a lot of opportunity there for other products too. And another thing, like the Cargill plant up in Blair, it's the Cargill family. There's so many byproducts. It's a very efficient plant. They use all them byproducts for different things. So I think our mission, while it's always been basically ethanol, is kind of expanding to not just ethanol, but ethanol and byproducts and biofuels and other things as we move forward.
And I would agree with that. I do think I've always felt that one day maybe ethanol might be the byproduct of what we're doing with all of the products that are being utilized today, and it's encouraging to see what's happening there. And so again, I appreciate the work you or the background you bring, and I think what you can bring to the board. So thank you for testifying today.
Thank you.
Senator Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chairman Bass. You said carbon capture twice, and I kept forgetting. I was wondering why that was registering with me. So we passed the bill about the sequestration 2 years ago. I assume the ethanol board would have limited involvement in that, or do you have any knowledge about people expressing interest, looking at those projects, or we were basically told that it was going to get us into the California market, really.
So not specific to the ethanol board, but to my other job. You know, I know we've been meeting with Summit based out of Iowa. We're looking at a number of projects. I mean, it kind of depends on what happens with the pipelines. Once the pipelines start moving and are approved and everything happens there, then we'll get into the modification side of the plants. But that it's a huge topic of conversation right now. It's very exciting. There's a lot of things going. And I think once that starts happening, we'll probably have discussions more as a board once we get to those points. I hope that answers your question.
That's great, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for coming in today. Thank you for willing to continue to serve.
Yeah, thank you for having me here today.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Anyone would like to testify as a proponent to the reappointment of Mr. Bradley Bird to the Nebraska Ethanol Board?
Good afternoon, Chairman Bossman and members of the Natural Resources Committee. I am the aforementioned Reed. Coming up to speak, my name is Reed Wagner, R-E-I-D, W-A-G-N-E-R. I'm actually the director of the Nebraska Ethanol Board. I started with the board last year about this time as well. So I'll just kind of start by explaining a little bit on the ethanol industry's outlook. It's rapidly changing. I mean, it's changed even in the last year that I've been here with the board too. And as kind of mentioned, one of the ways forward is looking at ethanol as maybe kind of a building block for other products going forward. There's a lot of really interesting chemistry being taken place in Columbus, Blair. Other plants are looking elsewhere for the same exact thing, all to try to bring value back to the state of Nebraska, our growers, the producers of ethanol, the producers of our grains. So kind of looking at that, there's a lot of innovation that could be brought to Nebraska specifically, and that brings a lot of infrastructure and investment. And we're happy to have Brad be offered for reappointment here to our board in kind of that labor role to understand the workforce development requirements, as well as, of course, looking at the talent pipeline coming through Nebraska to supplement all of these really, really fantastic projects in so many different areas. Happy to answer some of the questions that were posed earlier too, kind of on the administrative side. So our funding comes from a tax on denaturant purchased by ethanol plants. So they pay a 1.25 cent per gallon tax that then funds our board and our activities. We do use those for promotional activities, research and development activities, as mentioned, the E30 demonstration, just proving the use of ethanol as a higher blended fuel in our existing fleet. There's many good environmental benefits for running a smaller chain molecule like ethanol. I could get pretty in the weeds and be nerd out up here for a little bit, but all in all, it's really good for the environment, trying to displace our fossil fuels and some of the toxic components of gasoline through the use of bio-based ethanol. We also have 24 ethanol plants operating across the state at the moment. The permitted capacity across all 24 is 2.6 billion gallons. About 9.5 million tons of DDGs are created, which are those distillers grains. And then I guess I'll kind of jump in on some of the conversation on mead as well, and kind of looking at that particular plant within our statutes. Actually, I think it's 1330 or 1349 to 51. There's actually something that was passed by the legislature a couple of years ago to ensure that no ethanol plant is utilizing treated seed corn in their production process. Because what happened in mead is not production of ethanol from typical field corn. That was turned into effectively a waste facility with an ethanol byproduct, because that treated seed corn would have been treated as waste as well. So it was essentially an illegal operation of a waste facility happening out of mead. And of course, that's just the way that those bad actors kind of set up that particular plant in that application. So I just wanted to kind of answer that one as well, paint a little picture for what was happening at that facility. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from committee members? Senator Brandt.
Thank you, Chairman Bosselman. What does this add to a bushel of corn in the state of Nebraska if we didn't have these 24 plants?
Well, the entire economic impact is well over $4.5 billion for the state. Of course, that's spread out across multiple full-time equivalent employees. But on average, it adds about 23 cents per bushel back as the crow flies about 50 miles from each plant.
That's great.
And
So the second question is kind of a nerd question, so maybe you're my guy. I don't know if I dreamed this or if I heard this somewhere, because I farm too. Were they mixing ethanol and diesel fuel to try and get more pop out of that?
they were actually at one point doing kind of a hybrid blend with diesel and ethanol. And what we've actually seen is some technology startups moving toward converting diesel engines to use E98. I encourage you to check out Clear Flame Technologies. They actually are making conversions of those engines and working with partners in Nebraska, such as Warner Trucking Enterprises, to actually get that done too.
So if they're using E98, they're only using 2% diesel?
They're using probably 2% denaturant just because that would be the requirement.
Wow.
But they're just they're able to convert those diesel engines to run on ethanol fuel.
That would open up a huge market for you, would it not?
It certainly would.
All right, thank you.
Senator Jacobson.
I know you ran out of time in your testimony, so I'd like to maybe yield some time to you if you'd like to say a little bit more about wrapping up the meat situation or any other comments you want to give when you're open.
Yeah, I just appreciate the opportunity to kind of talk about it because I know the question was whether it's a black eye, but we see it as possible misuse of infrastructure in the state. Really negligent use of something so great and something so synergistic to Nebraskan agriculture. And you're correct, those distillers grains could not be used because of the use of those treated seed, those corn kernels, because they contain pesticides, herbicides as needed for their own application. So those wound up carrying forward into the feed, and that was really the crux of the issue there, and why they couldn't land apply or use those to feed livestock in the state. And again, the legislature did a fantastic job putting in something actually at the back of our statutes to ensure that no Nebraska facility will ever run on treated seed ever again. But I will make a comment that was the last and only ethanol plant actually at the time converted to run on treated seed. So there are no more in the country actually doing this application too.
And maybe just to follow up, I know when you go into an ethanol plant today or any grain facility, you're going to drive in and you're going to find a sign that says untreated seed is it would be unlawful to deliver it here. And so there are safeguards in place today. So that's out there as well. And I'm still trying to figure out how mead ever got certified to begin with, but I think it's safe to assume that's never going to happen again.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
Senator Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chairman Bosselman. I'm glad you called on me because I was going to give, that was Senator Bosselman's bill that prevents us from that happening again. So he deserves the credit for fixing this problem going forward. And my question was more of just, my impression of the ethanol board is promoting the industry. And I was just kind of trying to find out if you guys have had to, spend any extra funds addressing that issue from an education or, rehabilitation promotion. And it sounded like Mr. Bird answered that question, but I appreciate you coming up and answering further.
Yeah, absolutely. We have not. The lead agency that's been involved in a lot of the activity there has been the Environment and Energy Agency for the state of Nebraska. So they have been kind of on top of these things. And we're not a regulatory group, of course, but we do try to inform and educate where we can, such as moments like these, when we do have questions about different applications and different happenings and issues within the industry. So have not had to do anything extra.
Great, thanks.
Sir Mosier.
Do most of the ethanol plants produce food grade products?
No, for Nebraska in particular, we actually mostly produce fuel grade ethanol. For a bit of time during the pandemic, a couple locations were working to create USP grade, hand sanitizer grade ethanol. We have no beverage producers at the moment.
Oh, I think of course, this may not be something but I think they make corn syrup at the ADM plant in Columbus. So that's a food product.
Yeah, that would be the distinction between a wet mill versus a dry mill operation. Wet mill operations do create refined sugars that you would see like fructose or different sucrose, those sorts of things. And that happens with ADM in Columbus and also with Cargill and Blair.
So it's not going to kill the cattle that eat distillers grains any more than it kills the humans who drink soda with corn sugar in it. So then I got an even crazier question. So
Go ahead.
yeah, so if we're trying to get rid of carbon and sequester it, rather than pipe it from the ethanol plant to someplace where they inject it in the ground, why not just concentrate the CO2 where the injection point is and just take it out of the air? It doesn't have to be the same carbon dioxide that was generated at the ethanol plant. If you're getting rid of it somewhere, it would be kind of like carbon credits, you know, where you.
Sure. You're kind of knocking on the door of one of the really most exciting parts of what the Department of Energy at the federal level has been kind of looking at too, which is carbon utilization too. So pulling that CO2 out of the air and possibly even converting it to higher value products, whether that's, again, another kind of fuel, or if that's a different kind of chemical, maybe using it to make my suit jacket or yours that you're wearing today. Those kinds of chemistries are beginning to take hold, and we call that carbon utilization. And I'll kind of call back as well to a little bit of the referral to carbon sequestration, which LB 650 passed, I think that was 2021 or 2019 maybe. Trying to get my ducks in a row on the years, but it does allow for the geologic sequestration actually with Nebraska geology, specifically in areas that would be designated by our Oil and Gas Commission. So they're able to look at it and say, well, maybe you could do it right in your backyard too. You can pull that CO2 down and store it beneath the ground at your facility, or if there was a project to come along, then you can utilize it for something else. So there's a lot of different uses coming through.
All right, thanks a lot.
Any other questions from committee? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Wagner.
Thank you.
Other proponents for the reappointment of Bradley Bird to the Nebraska Ethanol Board? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Chairman Bosselman and committee members, my name is Dawn Caldwell, DAWN-CALDWELL. I'm the executive director at Renewable Fuels Nebraska, the statewide trade organization for the ethanol industry. We are a resource to encourage public policy that ensures the growth and expansion of the renewable fuels industry in our state. Our 24 ethanol plants, as Reed said, can produce 2.6 billion gallons of ethanol annually, second in production only to Iowa, sadly. And we are proud that Nebraska's ethanol industry contributes about $4.5 million annually to our state's economy. I'm here today to testify in support of the reappointment of Bradley Bird to the Nebraska Ethanol Board. Renewable Fuels Nebraska appreciates being able to work lockstep with the Nebraska Ethanol Board. I personally sit in the Ethanol Board meetings and see firsthand the level of engagement and sincere thoughtfulness that is portrayed from the members as they consider research projects, promotional opportunities, and educational endeavors. Having a person at the table representing those who are essential in plant upgrades, installations, and repairs is incredibly valuable. They have a genuine interest in long-term viability and success of the ethanol industry as the labor group that assists in all of that. And they help the farmers and industry in the room understand opportunities and challenges as projects are considered. Most recently, they have had to help keep us all aware of the many supply chain issues that may delay the projects that we all wish were getting completed. On behalf of Renewable Fuels Nebraska, thank you in advance for your positive vote to reappoint Bradley Bird to the Nebraska Ethanol Board. And I am glad to answer any further questions. You guys have been good. And now you have my mind thinking about carbon and the golden triangle in Nebraska. And so since we have the gold already, perhaps we can just create a way to make this carbon into diamonds and we have Nebraska jewelry. So if we're going to dream while we're in here.
And with that.
Yeah, yeah. Any other questions?
Thank you. Are there any questions from committee members?
All right. I'm glad you guys hammered me with all of them.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else who'd like to testify as proponent for the reappointment of Bradley Bird to the Nebraska Ethanol Board? Any other proponents? Seeing none, anyone would like to testify in opposition to the reappointment of Bradley Bird to the Nebraska Ethanol Board? Any opponents? Seeing none, anyone would like to testify in neutral capacity? Seeing none, that will close our hearing on the reappointment of Ms. Bradley Bird to the Nebraska Ethanol Board. Next, we'll open the hearing on Michael Thede to the Nebraska Ethanol Board. I believe a reappointment. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Senator Bosselman. Members of the Natural Resource Committee, my name is Michael Thede, Michaelthede. I'm the General Ag Representative to the Ethanol Board. I'm sitting here, I think this is my 5th appointment to the board, so I've probably been on the board a little bit longer than most of the other people. So I farm in Palmer, Nebraska, farm in Hall, Howard, Nance, Merrick counties, a little bit in Holt County. Went to the University of Nebraska, graduated with a major in ag economics. My wife and I farm there, as I said, in Palmer, Nebraska. Been married to my wife, Jean, for 26 years. We have 4 children. Our oldest is an accountant, recently graduated from Hastings College. Our 2 middle ones are attending the University of Nebraska at Kearney and the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. And our youngest one is 14. He's still in the house, so we get to see him every day. So spent 20 years now on the board. Have got to see a lot of changes in the ethanol industry from when I came on. We went through a big process of the build out of the industry here in the state. I don't remember how many ethanol plants were actually producing ethanol when I joined the board, but it was a handful. And so got to witness that, work through that, some of the challenges with that. And now we're kind of into a little bit different, a different chapter in the ethanol industry here. It's exciting. I've really enjoyed my term on the board. I'm looking forward to the future with the ethanol board and where it's going. One thing I wanted to touch on that I think probably Reed and the others weren't around on the board when I was. The ethanol board, probably around 10 years ago, somewhere in there, eight years ago, I can't remember exactly. We were struggling a little bit with where, as all these ethanol plants got built out, and we had some discussions within the board as to what's our role. We've got a lot of ethanol plants here. We've done this, and so where are we going? And I think through a lot of looking at where we thought the industry was going, and a lot of just self-analysis of the board as to what is the continuing role of the board. And I think maybe Senator Kavanaugh was kind of touching on this a little bit in his questions. And we really saw that the next stage of the industry was some of these additional products, some of the newer products that were coming out, and some of the direction that we really saw that there was probably even a bigger need for the board, because it became it seems like we're dealing with a lot more subjects now than when I first came on. We were dealing with, where are we going to put a plant? Is this a good spot? And how do we get it built? That was kind of our job. And so the board is filling that role, I think, very well. Our staff is doing a great job, and I've really enjoyed watching Reed as he came on the board and has done a great job for us. And we still have our same staff of four that we've always had. So I really enjoyed my time on the board. So I take any questions from anybody that try to answer as best I can.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Thede. Are there any questions from committee members? Senator Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chairman Bosman. Thank you for your service and willingness to continue to serve. So you've been on the board for a while. You've seen the development of the industry. Is there room for more plants in Nebraska? Are we at capacity? What's the kind of market look like for that?
I think there probably could be some room for some more plants in the state. You have to weigh, all the feed and all of the different ways. When my particular farm at Palmer, when I pull out of the driveway with a truckload of corn, I have 9 ethanol plants within 50 miles of my place. So my personal experience is maybe a little different than some other people's within the state, but there's probably some areas that there would be the ability to put some other plants if the economics and the environment and all of that all played out, that it would work.
And does the board work on bringing in new plants or any of that kind of development of the industry on that side?
We facilitate that. We really work a lot with trying to get individuals information. You know, how would you go about do this? A lot of times, ethanol board is a place that somebody may call the first time. You know, how do we do this if we want to do this? And so we tend to facilitate. We tend to be we've worked very closely with numerous different governors' offices over the years, and when they call, they want to know, and the legislature, you know, they want to know, can you get us some information on this subject or that subject? And that's a lot of the role we fill is providing information and facilitating development of the industry. We don't necessarily go out and actively recruit people to build plants, but.
Thank you.
Sir Jacobson.
I guess I'd have a couple of questions. Number one, I guess maybe you could speak a little bit to it. It seems as we look at rather the numbers of new plants, it's really the increases in efficiencies of the existing plants and the greater capacity that's being created and better byproducts and more byproducts that are being generated from the existing plants that are there. I know the Aurora facility, they've recently entered into an arrangement with Kappa, and I believe that'll be significantly more capacity coming out of that particular facility, which I'm glad to hear because there's going to be bidding stronger bids for corn and needing more corn to go through that plant. I know I've got the same situation. We can go to Poet and Fairmont, or we can go to Aurora, and we can also go to Hastings. So we got three quality plants that are nearby. But I think it seems to me that increasing capacity is going to be a big focus. Can you speak a little bit to what might be happening yet in other byproducts that we might be seeing from the plants, or are we seeing more of a push in these existing plants to do that, or is it more capacity focus at this point?
I think it's a little of all of that, actually. It kind of depends on the plants and their focus and the company that owns them. It seems like there's some that move towards the. Let me back up. There's quite a few that have went down the road of trying to make their plants more efficient as they built the plants and they got them running. You know, they would quickly see where there was bottlenecks in the plants, and so those have all been addressed. Now they have tended to move to more building efficiencies into their systems. I would suggest that most of the ethanol plants in the state are running in excess of what they call nameplate capacity, mostly because of those reasons. They've made them much more efficient. There are numerous things that we see that, and I can't speak to any specific ones. I'm not real technical in the chemistry of everything, but it seems like in our board meetings we have numerous new products that are being talked about, and you know, some of them don't get off the ground, but there's, as Reed alluded to, just lots of different things that seem to be popping up that are going to be potentials for some of these plants to be able to take advantage of. Every plant seems to be designed a little bit different, and so some of those things don't fit well with one plant or may work for another plant. So I don't think you'll see, you know, specific products that just move across every plant in the state, but there'll be things that certain plants take on that are enhance their revenue stream. I think you made a comment, Senator Johnson, earlier, or Jacobson, sorry, about that the ethanol may become maybe more of a byproduct of the process, and I would kind of agree with that statement as I've seen this progress as we've gone forward. Obviously, every one of them is going to be producing ethanol, but there's some very high value products that can come out of it, the process of making ethanol, and I think that's where the industry seems to be gravitating towards. So,
Sir Frederickson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Boston. So first of all, thank you for your service. I think you mentioned over 20 years or around 20 years on the board. Thank you. And I think because of that, you sort of bring a bit of a unique perspective to the industry. You've seen a lot of advancement with ethanol. And I think kind of given that, I'm curious to hear what you see as what you believe the board's priority should be in the next 4 or 5 years.
So I would say that number one is helping facilitate new businesses that are trying to co-locate bioethanol plants with maybe the possibility of producing some of these unique new products that people are looking at. A lot of it is, on the cutting edge, and so sometimes they don't fulfill what we hope it will. But I think if as best we can facilitate those things, providing technical advice and just putting the right people in touch with the people that we know, that the board has significant contacts around the state for all these years. And so I think that's where I see our role, trying to help companies that are trying to locate in the state. They may be new companies, they may be existing companies just trying to add, a Cargill or ADM or something, just trying to add to their process.
So in many ways, kind of like a facilitator or an enabler.
That was the initial role of the board, and I think that continues to be the role of the board. It's just focus has changed a little bit, whereas when I first came on, as I said earlier, was more of a focus of helping facilitate siting plants, and we did that. There's a lot of plants that people that we worked with that wanted to site plants that never came to fruition. And there's plants that we helped and they're producing today. And so I think that will continue to be, but instead of siting plants, not that we couldn't do that, and we would be, more than willing to try to help with doing that. The focus seems to have shifted a little bit and to helping facilitate some of these, maybe, I don't necessarily want to say they're smaller companies, but they work in a little more of a niche, producing specific, different products that you can pull out of the distiller's grains or the ethanol itself, those kind of products. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions from committee members?
I just have one last one. I think, again, it's probably safe to say that really when you look at siting and plants, having access to rail is critically important to be able to move the ethanol out, having some access to feed yards within some proximity to be able to move the distiller's product, at least the wet distillers in particular. And then at the same time, being in a position to where you can access the raw corn. And I think the drought this summer has caused some of the Western plants to come under some real pressure in order to be able to access corn, and probably having rail service to be able to bring more grain in is going to be a piece of it as well. And so we're experiencing some of that, I think, as we start looking at some of the challenges on siting. But I am very encouraged by what the work that's being done. I appreciate the work you're doing and have done to really help promote the industry. So thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Seeing none, thank you for your willingness to serve. Thank you for coming to Industry. Thank you. Would I ask anyone who'd like to testify as a proponent for the reappointment of Michael Thede to the Nebraska Ethanol Board? Please step forward.
All right, I'm back. Good afternoon, Natural Resources Committee. Again, my name is Reid Wagner, R-E-I-D-W-A-G-N-E-R. Again, I'm the director of the Ethanol Board. Very happy to be a proponent for the reappointment of Michael Thede to the Nebraska Ethanol Board. As mentioned before, he brings a wealth of experience, being one of our longest term board members currently on the board. He represents one of 4 positions that must be actively engaged in growing a crop. With Nebraska Ethanol Board structure, in the past, we've had 4 board members kind of representing corn, wheat, sorghum, and then general farming. And we have the general farming category to really cover kind of that point of, as was alluded to earlier, the golden triangle, which is kind of the interplay between corn, the livestock industry, and the ethanol industry. Of course, utilizing corn, providing that cents per bushel value back, and then processing it and having those distillers grains to give to our very vibrant beef industry as well. I did strategically hold on to a question from the previous testimony, which is, the question was, do we do a lot of wet versus dry distillers grains? We do quite a bit. Of course, there's the mix, as Brad had alluded to. Lately, especially in kind of some of the more western areas, we do a lot of the wet and modified distillers and being connected to feedlots directly and being able to really supply an extremely advantaged feed for the cattle across the state. Mike brings a wealth of knowledge and actually the full development and integration of ethanol into our agricultural space like that. With 20 years, this is really how it's been brought forth and developed. So just would love to recommend him for reappointment and then would welcome any questions from you guys.
Thank you, Ms. Wagner. Other questions from committee members? Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Chairman Bosselman. Thank you for your testimony again. When you listed the components that could be used to make ethanol, at one time switchgrass was going to be the great savior. Do we still have research going on, or we've looked at that and just set it aside?
Yeah, the question is a little bit on cellulosic ethanol as kind of the catch-all term for that, whether it's wood waste, switchgrass, corn stover, you name it. There is a significant amount of research that has been going on. A lot of the hurdles that accompany some of those things are the logistics of bringing those crops to site to be able to process. You're asking that farmer to go through and essentially do a second harvest of their corn stover, bring it in, and then some of the pre-treatment things are difficult, but we have made strides in that. Ethanol producers are much more efficient in using their own corn kernel fibers in kind of a cyclic process to use as much of the kernel as they possibly can. And so in some of those efficiencies, we've kind of been able to claim some of that cellulosic space, as kind of discussed, I suppose, probably across the last 20 years. Some of those advancements are notable. I think for us in Nebraska, the greatest opportunity would be to use some of those byproducts that, of course, are used in feed. Corn stovers also has plenty of applications, but possibly one use could be the generation of ethanol going forward.
All right, thank you.
Other questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next proponent for the reappointment of Michael Thede to the Nebraska Ethanol Board.
All right, hello again, Dawn Caldwell, DAWN, CALDWELL, Executive Director at Renewable Fuels Nebraska. And to save the repeat of all this stuff, we really encourage the reappointment of Mr. Thede on the board. I actually was in college with Mike. We shared math class together, drove to math class together, and I felt safer on the days that I drove to math class, I will say that, versus him driving to math class. But regardless, we've both come a long way in 25 or 30 years, and I'm really proud to have him serving on the Nebraska Ethanol Board in that full farm capacity. To address a few things that have been talked about, just that wet mill, dry mill discussion and the unique things about a couple of the wet mills, and I'm going to speak particularly to ADM at Columbus. They chose their site not because of corn grown in the area, not because of roads in and out of the area, not even because of the railroad, though that was very convenient, but it was because of how many feedlots were in the area, and they would have that access to the feedlots with their distillers grains so as to have to dry very little of it, utilizing less natural gas in the process. And that's really important for the ethanol plants to be able to sell as much wet as possible versus dry to keep their carbon score lower and have those better markets for the ethanol leaving the plant. A unique thing focusing on that plant that I really love thinking about food grade items is the corn starch that's made at that plant. And that's a really wonderful export from Nebraska. We talk about how many Nebraska commodities get exported. One from there is the corn starch going to Mexico to be utilized in making Corona beer. So if you love a good Mexican lager with a lime in it, very possibly part of that originated from Nebraska. So that's a fun fact for you all to share as you tout the ethanol industry right here in our state. And one more thing I want to address that Senator Jacobson brought up regarding rail and regarding corn and the drought, it is very serious for those Western plants. And we do have a testifier here later for Director Macy that works in one of those Western plants or runs a Western plant that has that very challenge right now. And I will speak to a further West plant, Bridgeport, who told Senator Fisher back in September already, they have not taken in 5 train loads of corn his entire time having that ethanol plant. They anticipate as many as 35 this year because there is not enough corn in the region due to the drought. So just for awareness for that situation out in that region.
Okay. Thank you for your testimony.
Questions?
Senator
I just
Jacobson.
have one quick question. If it would be possible next time you testify, if you could bring samples of all the byproducts.
I will see what I can do.
That's not allowed. Sorry. Senator Sloan.
Perhaps a field trip for the Natural Resources Committee?
We could do that.
I think a field trip is in order. I would love to host you on a field trip.
I love field trips. I'm all in. All about a field trip.
Any other comments or questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming in and testifying. Any other proponents? Please step forward. Seeing none, anyone like to testify in opposition to the reappointment of Michael Thede to the Nebraska Ethanol Board? Anyone in opposition? Seeing none, anyone in neutral capacity? Seeing none, that will close our hearing on the appointment or reappointment of Michael Thede to the Nebraska Ethanol Board. Thank you very much for coming in. Next, we will open our hearing for the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy for Director Jim Macy. Afternoon, Director.
Good afternoon. Senator Bossman and the members of the Natural Resource Committee. My name is Jim Macy, spelled Jimmacy, address 245 Fallbrook Boulevard in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm the director of the Department of Environment and Energy. I've served in this position for 8 years, and I'm seeking your support to advance my confirmation as Governor Jim Pillen's appointee. Thought I'd give you a little background about my history. This is my 38th year as an environmental professional. Started out in Missouri with the Soil and Water Conservation Program for the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. I advanced to being a program manager in Kansas City field office for all the environmental programs Missouri offered for about 15 years. Went down to administer a new division that encompassed all the field office and the environmental laboratory. Did that for about 4 years. Had a little transition in between 2 governors and ended up in compliance and enforcement for drinking water. And as an appointee in that area, I ended up being a receiver for a very small community in southeast Missouri, restoring their critical drinking water and wastewater infrastructure. And then I closed out after being successful in that position. I managed the financial services component for the state revolving fund for the last 2.5, 3 years of my career at Missouri. Retired there, did a little consulting for about 1.5 years, saw the job for this position up here, interviewed with the Environmental Quality Council and Governor Ricketts. So here I am again, 8 years from that point. Married, my wife Lisa's been a career nurse for 35 years. We have 2 daughters. One's out of the household, very proud of her accomplishments as a interior design architect that's board certified. I'm very proud of my second daughter, who is working to be a nurse and hopefully get out of my basement in about 6 more months. So very successful family life and been married for 30 years. Very proud of all my family. And I'm also proud of the work that we do at the Environment and Energy Department. I'm really proud to be a part of a team that works together, and we do some amazing things. 8 years ago, I set what I would think 3 ambitious goals for the agency: providing exceptional service,
focusing on compliance assistance and demonstrating accountability through performance measures. I'd like to just share with you a couple of the things that we've done over those 8 years. Currently, there's no backlog permits in any of the construction or operating permit programs within the agency. Over the last 8 years, we've conducted 26,134 inspections. Of that, 2,000 letters of non-compliance, formerly or old NOVs. Most facilities return to compliance in a very timely manner. For those that don't, we've had 183 formal enforcement referrals over that time. Of those, 142 we wrote compliance orders on, administrative orders on, and the other 41 the Attorney General did. So we've got about 9% of the letters of non-compliance that have had additional enforcement, but overall, we maintain that we've had about a 99% compliance rate, or about 1% have to be told what to do. So I think that's pretty good. During the floods of 2019, this illustrates some of how I think we serve the public very well. We sampled 770 private wells with the help of EPA and their lab assistance. We initiated a brand new program that provided 0% interest rates to those communities adversely affected by those flood issues. And that served as a bridge loan between when the community could get back up on its feet and receive some FEMA assistance. During COVID, we kept the doors open to the public. We conducted inspections, performed the vital service work that we do every day. Our team was the only environmental team in the 4-state area that kept the doors open during the pandemic. So I'm proud of the work they did there, and proud of what they did during that time frame. We report our metric measurements, or what we do monthly. We put that on our website very proudly. We've initiated a rapid response team for new permit applications, and we coordinate that with the Department of Economic Development and other special projects that focus on compliance assistance or quality reviews in a timely manner. So we've worked with companies like Circular and Seward, Kappa Ethanol, and Ravenna. They've had several expansion projects. Lincoln Premium Poultry in Fremont that solved both the community waste problem and provided new opportunities in the market area for family farms. Hartwell Grain and a biodiesel plant in Hastings that combines work with both Cargill and Love's. Duonix and Beatrice, another biodiesel facility, and then Monolith and Hallam. It's a carbon black and fertilizer plant. Since the inception of the Dollar and Energy Savings Loan Program, that's part of the energy component, in 1990, we've helped over 30,000 energy saving projects, financing over $385 million in that program. And then the Weatherization Assistance Program that started in 1977, about $227 million been provided to make energy efficient improvements to over 70,000 homes. We reorganized in October of 2020, about the same time we were moving into a new facility, consolidating 4 different buildings into one area at Fallbrook. So we moved from traditional stovepipes of air, land, water, drinking water, and energy divisions into inspection and compliance, monitoring, remediation, planning and aid, engineering and permits, and the 404 drinking water well standards and groundwater program areas. What does this do? Well, it helps both our teams and those that we regulate to look at the world through a more holistic lens. So when you come in, if you bring in a new client or expanding in business opportunity, we sit down and look at you from all the permitting aspects of water, air, land, et cetera. And it helps both our team then become better professionally. A side benefit of that is when I started in 8 years ago, we only had 9 engineers that were professional engineers. We've got 30 engineers now, and 15 of those are professional engineers. Those 9 passed their boards on the first try. So having the experience, real world experience to look at things more holistically helps everybody, and both our team to help keep our team at the agency, and then it helps the people out there that we serve. Our responsiveness time frames have improved. An example is the drinking water and wastewater engineering programs. Used to be the average in 2018 was about 22 days to receive a permit. Today in 2022, timeframes are 16 days. That's about a 27% increase. And we don't sacrifice quality for that increase in time. So since my appointment, I've been engaging in Nebraska leadership all across the state. I believe in team management approach. I think state officials should work together with local people to solve local problems. I believe we should work with our regulated community. I believe that we should assist small businesses in understanding what they need to do to be in compliance. I use a team approach in recruiting businesses to Nebraska by educating them to what the environmental permitting requirements are and then their obligations. My goals, if I'm confirmed, I'd like to continue the foundational work of these goals that I spoke of: exceptional service, compliance assistance, and performance measurement. And additionally, I'd like to plan to develop a comprehensive statewide engineering analysis of water quality and community systems and the private wells to improve our water quality and help ensure Nebraskans are able to have safe drinking water. I'd also work to modernize the way data is collected and transmitted to the agency and embrace any new technology that allows Nebraska agriculture and industry partners to be more effective, efficient, and sustainably focused. I'll continue to work with local leaders to solve problems. We will treat the regulated community with honesty, integrity, and implement common sense solutions. We will continue our transparency in how we regulate, and we will be firm but fair in enforcement. Thank you for listening to that today, and I'll be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Director Macy. Could you speak to your quality control program?
Pardon?
Quality control program, could you speak to that?
Well, yeah. So when we issue a permit in any performance area, we socialize internally that draft of that permit with those that have to implement those regulations. And there's agreement on the parameters of that permitting process before that permit's issued.
Okay, thank you. Could you also talk to us a little bit about your work with EPA?
We have a healthy relationship with EPA. Sometimes that ebbs and flows between administrators and administrations. But over time, I'd say we have a very dynamic relationship to where we can sit down with any program area of the EPA Region 7, talk through difficult issues and come to an agreement on what each agency will do and will not do, and how we work together. For the 2019 flood issue, EPA was a huge partner in helping us set up that environmental sampling for the drinking water program. We used their lab to do those analysis, and I believe still today we use part of EPA's regional lab in Kansas City to sample for free some of our program areas. So great relationship.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions from committee members? Sir Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chairman Busselman. Thank you, Director Macy, for the willingness to continue serving and the willingness to be here. I'm going to, for the record, you and I sat down and talked for a long time, so don't need to rehash all the stuff we talked about, but I do appreciate that, and I appreciate you answering all my questions. But to that point, for future bills or LRs coming from this committee, I assume you're going to continue with the same policy of subjecting yourself to our aggressive questioning that this committee seems to be known for at this point. So I just ask you, if you continue in your next term of service, we'll continue with that policy.
Happy to sit down with any committee member, any senator privately or publicly and answer any questions you have.
I appreciate that. You and I have had our disagreements, colorful conversations, arguments, however you want to say it, but I appreciate your continued willingness to even speak to me. So, and the only, other question, obviously there's a lot of things we could talk about, but like I said, I don't want to belabor the point. I'm just reading these letters here. You've got some nice support letters from industry. And one of the things we're talking about is how great it is to work with the department and how easy you've made it. And what you and I have talked about is another perspective of the department is kind of just being that bulldog in fighting for people. And you said about 99% of folks are in compliance all the time. And that 1%, that makes a huge difference to those people that 1% affects. And I just want to make sure that we're on the same page, that, the department, and I know we gave you guys some more powers that you haven't probably used yet, but looking forward, just want to make sure that your perspective of the department going forward is one of, working with industry, but make sure when it becomes necessary that you will use the full power of the department.
We follow the rule of law. We follow our statutory authority, and we follow the regulations that those statutes provide our agency to operate with. And absolutely, we do not blink at that at all. So if you want to work with us and come into compliance, we are happy to open the door and work with you to a point. And then there's a point when we decide that we've had enough time to work with and it's time to use another tool in the toolbox. And that's part of the business. We have to do that. We have to follow the law. We can't just wing what we want to do. We're given a certain amount of authority, and we are duty bound to the citizens of Nebraska to follow the law, and we happily do that.
Thank you.
Other questions, committee members, Senator Brandt?
Thank you, Chairman Bosselman. Thank you, Director Macy, for testifying today. I'd like to compliment your department. In the past, I have worked with DEQs here, and your department is very friendly to producers out there that deal with those specific situations and getting us background information. So I want to throw that out there. I like people that have experiences, even bad experiences. And I guess we talked about this too when we talked to my office. What would you do different about mead, or what did you learn from the mead situation?
Well, mead again is a one-off instance, and I don't know if I want to get into too much into how we make litigation decisions. But we treated mead as we would any other industry or responsible party, and how we dealt with their incremental compliance issues. And at a point, we decided that we'd had enough of working with that facility and made a referral.
All right, thank you.
And we do that with any other industry. And I can tell you, we were timely in the referral making process, and how we decided to litigate. And that was another tool that we had in the toolbox that we had to use.
All right, thank you.
Could you speak to, you've had other voluntary cleanups. Could you give us an example of one or two of those? How that
Yes.
worked?
Yeah, probably within the first several months of my original appointment, we had the community of Beatrice and Mayor Stan Worth. We had a meeting in our office where the EPA that probably could have used some communication improvements advised that particular community that they were about ready to enter into a Superfund site. And the way the community found that out was through a federal public notice in their newspaper. Not a letter to the mayor, not a phone call, but they found a notice in the paper. So the mayor wasn't really happy about that, and we had a meeting with the responsible parties trying to develop an agreement on how to pursue cleanup in that area. And the mayor did ask, and Tobias, his city administrator, asked if, well, is there anything that you all have that you could help us with? And I'd worked with voluntary cleanup programs in Missouri and knew they were very similar to Nebraska's. And I said, well, sure. I think we could, if you want to enter into an agreement and figure out how to clean this up. They had 5 or 6 different responsible parties. The community bought into a bad land purchase that didn't have full due diligence performed. And they were unwittingly backed into a pretty significant groundwater and soils problem along the Blue River. So they quickly made a city council ordinance adoption. They wrote a $5,000 check to the agency for the materials that we need to enter into a VCP program. And they completed that in about year and a half. So they didn't want the stigma of a Superfund site in their community, and the VCP program worked very well in that case. Had other cases over in Ogallala where a site has been turned into, I believe, a daycare facility. Just all around the state, there's 20 or 30 different. Pinnacle Bank Arena here in this town, that was a huge VCP program. So a lot of successes. It does work. We're very proud of that program.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you, Director, for coming in today.
Thank you.
I'd ask anyone who'd like to testify as a proponent for the appointment of Director Macy to the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy to please step forward.
Afternoon. Good afternoon, Chairman Bosselman and members of the Natural Resources Committee. I am Sam Drennan, SAMDRINNIN. I serve as the chair-elect for the Nebraska Cattlemen Natural Resources Committee and own a feed yard near Columbus. Nebraska Cattlemen supports the reappointment of Jim Macy to be the Director of Environment and Energy. Director Macy's goals for the Department of Environment and Energy are providing exceptional service, focus on compliance assistance, and demonstrate accountability through performance measures. Over the past 8 years, we have witnessed Director Macy carry out these goals in service to Nebraska's beef cattle industry while being mindful of his duties to the citizens of the state. Director Macy has led the department by example, being transparent with stakeholders, industry leaders, and constituents. He always keeps an open line of communication with the agriculture industry and takes a common sense approach on ensuring compliance with regulatory regulations and policies. The agriculture industry faces vital discussions ahead on topics of water quality, energy generation, and permitting regulations. Director Macy has proven he is the individual with the background and experience to handle these important topics ahead. We appreciate the department's transparencies under Director Macy's leadership. He has proven to be a leader who cares about all parties involved and will continue to use common sense practices for the future of Nebraska's environment. For these reasons, the members of the Nebraska Cattlemen urge you to confirm Mr. James Macy. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Drennan. Are there any questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you for coming in today. Thank you for your testimony. Next proponent. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairman Bosselman, committee members. My name is Tony Lighting, spelled Tonyleiding, D as in Delta, ING. And I serve as the president of Trenton Agri Products, an ethanol producer in southwestern Nebraska, and also as the president of the Renewable Fuels Nebraska, a state trade association advocating for renewable fuels here in Nebraska. I'm here to testify in support of Governor Pillen's appointment of Jim Macy as the Director of Nebraska's Department of Environment and Energy. I've known Director Macy for several years and have worked with him both as a part of the regulated community and as a board member of Renewable Fuels Nebraska. Director Macy did a fantastic job during his tenure as the director of the NDEE under the Ricketts administration. He was willing to work with the regulated community to ensure compliance was attained and maintained. He made the DEQ and later the DEE an organization that you could work with and approach with issues instead of trying to keep them at arm's length. With that being said, Director Macy and his team ensured the regulated community upheld the conditions of their permits. I can personally attest to this, as we were issued an administrative order and another different notice of violation during this period. While these events are never fun for a business, what impressed me most was how the NDEE worked with us to help attain compliance and create a clear path forward. Another example of how Director Macy's NDEE helped grow business in Nebraska was their endeavor to meet with the regulated entities prior to commencing a project to ensure the construction and operating permit process was smooth and efficient. These meetings helped RFN member companies complete projects more efficiently and on schedule. I can also personally attest how beneficial these pre-project meetings are to permit holders. This kind of customer service from the NDEE provides businesses more certainty when evaluating new projects and potential capital expenditures that will ultimately benefit the local communities and the state of Nebraska. Trent Agri Products and Renewable Fuels Nebraska's member businesses are excited to work with Director Macy to ensure compliance metrics are met while continuing to grow the renewable fuels industry in Nebraska. We thank you in advance for your positive vote to appoint Jim Macy as Nebraska's Director of Environment and Energy. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lading. Are there any questions from the committee members? Seeing none.
Thank you,
for
everyone.
coming in for testimony. Appreciate it. Any other proponents? Please step forward.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is John Hansen, John, Hansen, Hansen. I'm the president of Nebraska Farmers Union. And so if you think about the primary responsibilities of the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy, I have more than enough opportunities to interact with the director in both arenas and have done so, and would report that we have a very positive working relationship. And for somebody like me who represents thousands of family farmers across the state, there's always going to be issues. And what you hope for is an open door and an open mind. And if there's a problem, you're able to talk to somebody and find out what the facts are and try to get things resolved. And we've been able to do that successfully. His door has been open. And I would point out that a particular period of time that was really a crisis for our state was the 2019 floods and all the things that happened with that and the impact that they had on livestock facilities and, you know, the nature of what was going on with overflows, all of those things, that I thought that Director Macy did an outstanding job of using something that is kind of hard to come by sometimes in government, but he used common sense and a flexible hand. And, people are not responsible and certainly didn't go out of their way to cause problems. Who anticipates a 500-year flood? No one. And so we worked on a weekly basis with all the stakeholders, the different departments, and I was extremely impressed with what he did, how he went about it. And I appreciate his open door relationship that he has with the stakeholders. And yes, he enforces the law, and that's what he should do. And I've had the opportunity to know and work with, I think, pretty much all of the directors of environmental quality and now the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy since it was first formed. And I would tell you that my opinion, Jim is a keeper.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Are there any questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you for
Thank
coming in
you.
for testimony. Thank you. Any other proponents, please step forward. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon again, Mr. Chairman, members of the Natural Resources Committee. My name is Andrew Dunkley, ANDREW, I'm with the Nebraska Farm Bureau. And once again, I'm here on behalf of Mark McCarg, who is out sick, our president, who is out sick. Wanted to say on our behalf and on behalf of the Nebraska State Dairy Association as well, that we are in full support of the reappointment of Director Macy. We have had wonderful dealings with the director, and he has been nothing but judicious and open to work with, always taking our call. It's going to be a really important couple of years here for water quality in Nebraska, and this is a large conversation, and we're going to have many of these conversations that Jim has really been communicative on with us, and we really appreciate that. And so we can't support his reappointment any stronger. So if you have any questions, I'm open to them.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Any other proponents? Any proponents? Seeing none, anyone like to testify in opposition to the appointment of Nebraska, Jim Macy to the Director of Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy? Any opponents? Seeing none, anyone like to testify neutral? Seeing none, for the record, we do have several letters of support from OPPD, Javier Fernandez, from ACEC, Katie Wilson, Kelly Brunkhorst from Nebraska Corn Growers, Les Chafin from League of Municipalities, Al Junkie from Nebraska Pork Producers, Lori Luby from Nebraska Soybean Association, Becca Martin from Director of Government Affairs of Cargill. We have one opposition letter from Al Davis from Nebraska Chapter of the Sierra Club. This will conclude our hearing on the appointment of Jim Macy to the Director of Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy. Thank you all for coming today. I want to ask you all to please exit the room because I would like to have an exec session. Thank you for coming today.
Can we start over?